So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Just a heads up, this presentation will be 30 minutes, but we are going to stay around after for a Q&A for good amount of time. So if any questions come up, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll revisit at the end. There'll be a Q&A, and just due to the content and the limited amount of time, we're going to do the questions at the end. But please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and we'll revisit those. I do want to give a notice that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be sent out most likely by the end of the week. But I just want to give everyone a heads up that this is being recorded for people to watch at a later time. So let's see, go here, next slide. So quick overview of the presentation. We'll just do a quick introduction. Then we'll go over what the program is, when does a project have to go custom. We're going to go over the custom process, application processes and contact information, and again, Q&A at the end of the slides. Real quick introductions. My name is Andy Gustafson. I'm the program manager for the AESAP program with PG&E. We also have on the call Antonio Aliberti, one of our engineers, who's also going to be able to help answer some questions related to custom stuff. But yeah, let's get going here. So real quick, who is TRC? So TRC manages the AESAP program. We run that program. We're a global tech-enabled engineering and consulting services firm. So shown here in the markets we serve are for the advanced energy sector of TRC, the type of customers and type of programs and customers we serve. So we do things such as power, transportation, real estate, government, water, things like that. With energy, we do implement various utility programs, and a number of them are in California. So outside of this AESAP program, there's some other California programs that TRC serves as well in California, including this one, which is AESAP. So what is AESAP? So AESAP is TRC's, it's what stands for Agricultural Energy Savings Action Plan. We offer prescriptive deemed rebates, custom incentives, financing for energy savings projects related to retrofitting equipment or installing new equipment. We're what's called a third-party implementer that's contracted by PG&E to help serve this sector. So for our program, just as a quick background, our program, the AESAP, specifically the Ag program, launched in 2021. We've been going for a few years now. We have an extension through 2027 for now, and hopefully we'll be going longer than that as well. But we got a number of years ahead of us as well. We comprehensively serve all the segments within PG&E's agricultural sector. So our third-party contracts are bound by NAICS codes that are tied to the service account IDs. Specifically, we serve all the Ag 11 NAICS codes, and we also serve the brewery, winery, distilleries. So want to quickly highlight those sectors that are shown in the images on the bottom. So we do things like crop production, controlled environment or horticulture, so that's indoor growing like cannabis, flowering, all those indoor growers. We do breweries, wineries, distilleries, like I mentioned. We also do like dairy projects, livestock, things like that. We have services to calculate savings and process incentives, and our services are at absolutely no cost to the customers. So we're a free sort of one-stop shop. We're performance-based contracts, so we get paid based off delivering energy savings. Just a quick background, we have a rebate catalog in our program, and I highlight this for the trade pros because this might be another tool belt you can offer to customers outside of just FAAs and OBF projects. Feel free to check out this link later. It has a link to our what's called a rebate catalog. These are predetermined, like canned savings, common measures, and we could pay out cash rebates for these. There's no pre-approval required for these. We just collect the invoices and documentation. We get paid out a rebate. So if you're working with a customer and doing an FA, you can offer like rebates through our program. We're here to help make sure everything qualifies, but this could just be another thing you can offer for customers to help them, help them out there by giving them rebate incentives for qualifying measures. So definitely check that out after this meeting here. All right, so kind of getting into the meats and potatoes of this presentation here. So when does an OBF project have to go custom? So there was a recent CPC decision. This is a HOPS ruling that was issued by the CPUC that's requiring now that all OBF projects that are not NMEC, which is normalized metered energy consumption, eligible projects, those have to go the custom process now. So in the past, non-NMEC OBF non-incentive projects were allowed to still go through OBF. That's no longer the case. So what that means is a lot of these projects that don't fall under the NMEC eligibility are going to have to go through a third-party implementer such as ourselves. So we wanted to have this presentation. So if you're working with any ag-related customers, you can know and have like sort of some understanding of what's required so that you can have a successful project as you're working with the customers there. And once again, know that we are here to help. So we're here to help through this process and provide guidance and support as needed. And once again, no cost to the customer, you guys. So at a high level, so most, not all, but most agricultural and industrial type projects, they are not NMEC eligible. So when can you go NMEC with projects now, right, with the OBF platform? For those, they have to be like steady meter-based loads. So that examples of these might be like office lighting or cold storage, where there's very consistent loads without like seasonality or production impacts, things like that. Very steady loads like office lighting, cold storage is another example, things like that. Typically only commercial-like buildings and loads are allowed for NMEC, but what it comes down to is the variability of that meter-based data. It has to be 10% or lower uncertainty on that meter-based data to be able to go NMEC. So like I mentioned, most of the ag industrial projects don't fall under this. But if you do encounter a project you believe it is NMEC eligible, like it's very consistent, not low uncertainty loads, I would strongly encourage to still try to go the NMEC pathway. I mean, we're held out here to help as well. So if you're unsure, maybe talk with us so we can determine if a certain measure type or customer type should be NMEC eligible. And maybe we could push back and try to still be able to go through that full NMEC OBF non-custom pathway. So the custom projects, they do have a large number of like CPC policy requirements and guidelines, which we can help navigate. So we'll be covering several of those most important requirements today to help you be successful when you're pursuing an OBF project that is not allowed to go NMEC. Next slide here. So what is the custom savings platform? So this is measures where the energy savings are determined using like a site-specific analysis. This is typically like calculations with some pre-monitoring data and are finalized at the project completion stage. With custom savings pathway, a pre-approval is needed and required before the customer can purchase equipment or start working on the project, like removing equipment or starting on anything related to that. You need that pre-approval before the customer can do so. Otherwise, that's a showstopper and the project will be disqualified. Incentives are available. So I guess the one highlight of having to go the custom pathway is we can help combine custom incentives with these FAs that trade pros might be doing with the customer to help further buy down that loan and maybe make the loan more viable or the project more viable for the customer. These incentives are typically paid on like a per savings type basis. So depending on the savings or benefits of the project, then we determine the incentive level based on that. So we need a lot of information before we can say, this is what the incentive might be for this given project. So as mentioned, there's a number of requirements for the custom pathway with, like I mentioned, we're here to help with. Some of the big ones we want to cover here on this presentation is that custom pathway requires what's called program influence. We'll cover this on the next slide. It's subject to like statewide CPC guidance and decisions. So there's a lot of CPC memos. We're very mindful and we have a very good understanding of what those requirements are by the CPC. So we're here to help navigate those requirements on a given custom project, depending on the type of measure. We, as in other third-party program implementers, as we're contracted through the utilities and we ultimately are reporting through the CPC, we do have certain what's called total system benefits and total resource costs or cost effectiveness goals and requirements on our programs. So if the project or an FA that you might be pursuing does not have adequate benefits, savings, or benefits on that given project, we might not be able to accept it. But we're here to help perform and do that analysis to see if this is a project that we can do. So we'll do what's called a CET run. We'll help evaluate it and see if this is a project that we can take on. So first thing here is the big consideration is program influence, something called program influence. It's required for all custom pathway projects, even without an incentive. A custom pathway requires it. We must demonstrate that the program and the services resulted in the customer moving forward with the project. So a big thing to note here is if the customer is going to do this project anyway, it most likely will not get approved by the reviewers. We have to show influence on these projects. The good news is, like, if they're doing an FA or a loan, that ties into influence because they need the loan to do the project. So we need to document that and show that. So that's one example of influence, but we need to document this along the way, and we've highlighted some considerations here. So some of the services means like we're providing technical and financial influence to the customer through this decision-making process. So like if we provide them with several upgrade options, we help identify the energy savings measures, things like that. We give investment options like how the capital what capital the customer has and how it relates to the project and the scope. These are all things that are key considerations here. So, but once again, we need to demonstrate how we help the customer implement this more efficient, typically more costly measure than they would have otherwise done. So once again, we need to demonstrate if they're going to do this measure anyway, that's what's called a free rider, won't be a successful approval. We need to show how we're guiding those customers through for helping influence them to do the project. The CPUC likes to see us showing that they don't want incentives going out to customers that are going to do these projects anyway. That's not what they consider a good use of ratepayer funds. They want us to show that we're helping get the customer to want to do this project. So some of the key items that help relate to influence that is important to know as you're working with the customer are like measure identification. Did we help identify this measure for the customer? If so, let's document that. That helps build influence. Did we provide more than one option for them that they otherwise wouldn't have considered? Providing energy savings and incentive analysis to the customer helps build influence. Outlining the customer decision-making process. This is key and is required with the submission. So maybe it's you're working with the customer, you go out there and you identify some measures and you explaining, documenting like maybe some email interactions with the customer. Save those emails to show that you're helping the customer through this process. This all ties into that influence narrative that we need to identify and document and show in the project report. Investment criteria. So like, are there certain financial requirements to do the project? Do they need to have this OBF loan in order for them to do the project? All this stuff builds into what's called program influence, and we want to document that. Are there any non-energy benefits in the project? Examples might be water savings benefits, maybe lower maintenance costs, things like that. If they're going to do the upgrade for some of these other non-energy related reasons, that might impact the program influence narrative, and we need to identify that and see how that weighs in the overall program influence documentation. But at a very high level for program influence, we need to show how we're demonstrating the customer and helping them, motivate them to move forward with the project. And we need to show that with documentation. We can't just verbally give a narrative or a story of how this took place. We need to show documentation. So. The good news is there is a recent CPC resolution, it's called E5115, that was introduced to give sort of a tiered approach based on how much influence is really required for a given custom project. And the way they broke this out is like, if there's a certain incentive level on a project, there's different levels of influence that might be required. So an example here is if there's a very low incentive tied to that project, or no incentive, you have a very low rigor needed for that program influence. If it's a high incentive, like we pay out, it's not unusual for a program to pay out, hundreds of thousands of dollars near, sometimes it gets a very high rebate incentive dollars for customers. And there's different level of incentive requirements based on the incentive that we offer to the customer. But if as a trade pro, you're doing a project and you're just doing the loan as a custom pathway with no incentive, or maybe it's a very low under $7,500 incentive, there's less influence that you need to provide for that. The good news is we have a project feasibility study template that we help modify that gives guiding questions based on the tier of the incentive level or if there's no incentive. So if you're just doing a loan, you can refer to this document and it'll tell you the exact type of questions to ask the customer. And then we just, as long as we have those questions answered and documented in some sort of form of documentation, we'll have a successful program influence narrative. So we'll give a link to that afterwards that you can help as like a tool that you can have when you're talking with customers if you have a custom pathway type project. So real quick, I want to go over some examples of influence to give some examples of what's a good influence example and what's a maybe a poor one. So number one here, email documentation. Like say an example would be you get email documentation with a customer stating we need the OBF loan and or like an incentive to be able to do the project. So that's a green checkbox there. That's a good example. You have an email from them, some sort of documentation, like a tangible email that we are interacting with a customer where you have that document where they state they need the OBF loan and or incentive support to be able to do it. If you just say, oh, you tell us like, oh yeah, they need it, but we don't have an email to prove that, unfortunately, that's not going to be enough. They want that proof, right? Second example here, we might get an email documentation or email reference that you interacted with a customer where the customer states we need like a certain payback to be able to do this project, or maybe we need X dollars of cost coverage of this project to move forward with the project so that it meets like that payback needs or project criteria needs for that given project. That would be a good example too, because it's stating that we need certain coverage or something in our program. Our support through you, the trade pro, and us, the implementer, helps have the customer get there. So that's a good example that we have documentation to be able to lean back on for a successful influence narrative. Here's the third example. We don't have email documentation of the decision-making process with the customer. Everything's secondhand. So maybe secondhand information is we have a trade pro reach out to us and they say, this is the quote, this is what they want, maybe it's a lighting upgrade. They want to do this, and there's nothing else to go. No email interactions before where it states that they need the loan. There's no any sort of documentation that shows that you're helping provide technical influence through maybe his calculations or some other support. If we don't have anything, it's all verbal through like maybe calls you had with the customer. This is bad. This most likely will be a showstopper, and we will not have a successful approval with a custom project. The next big topic here we want to cover here, there's three big main topics on these slides, but the second one now is on what's called standard practice. So with custom incentives or the custom pathway, you typically can't just calculate or count just the actual savings the customers will see. I know it seems silly, but where programs are at these days in the state of California, the savings are based on specific code, typically on specific code or what's called a standard practice baseline. Existing conditions are not always allowed for claimable savings in the loan. The California has code requirements and the measure has to meet or exceed these requirements. There's also what the CPUC calls customer or industry standard practice, which is often used as the baseline for calculations in the custom pathway. There are various CPUC memos and references that they've issued in the past that help us determine what the appropriate baseline is based on the given measure type. So we can help. So if you have a specific measure in mind that has to go a custom pathway, we most likely will know what is the appropriate baseline we can reference there. A couple notes I want to highlight here as well is anytime the what's called maybe like the level of service is modified with a given project, it might trigger a new baseline requirement. So one example of a level of service change might be you're putting in lighting that increases the light output or level of, say, production for a given customer. So like an example might be an ag grower, like they have indoor lighting or something like that. If we're offering or they want lighting that has a higher output to help with production, that will trigger a new baseline because that new baseline is evaluated on that a level of service for that new light output. That's just one example, but anytime an upgrade impacts anything tied to production or level of service, typically that would trigger a baseline that might be slightly higher than what it would have been otherwise. And the CPUC does not want to pay EE funds towards customers that would have done this type of upgrade anyway. So it kind of ties back to that statement I made prior related to influence. Replacement type measures where you replace equipment often needs more than one quote or option. So whenever you're working with the customer on these type of measures, please always try to recommend or offer more than one option so we can demonstrate that we're helping the customer go towards the more efficient and often more expensive option. We want to definitely be able to highlight that. It's required for the custom pathway. This table here highlights what's called the measure application types for different type of measure codes under under the custom pathway for a given energy efficiency project, and what baselines are allowed for each of those. So as you can see here, for like add-on equipment measures, so maybe you're adding a VFD onto like a fan or a pump, or an add-on type measure, insulation, things like that. Those you can use existing conditions because you're adding on that existing equipment. Also, like behavioral type, retro-commissioning your behavioral type upgrades, which sometimes customers do, those can use existing conditions as well. But anytime you're doing like a new construction project or a replacement type project, replacing equipment, that baseline is often based on code or standard practice, like we talked about. There's also claimable measure costs that go into this, and those are kind of based off of these baselines as well. So for add-on or behavioral, you can use the full measure cost on those. For replacement measures, we use what's called incremental measure cost, which is just that incremental cost difference from that code or baseline measure cost, and what is the option, the more efficient option we're proposing. So that's why you need more than one quote or option typically, is because we can help show that incremental measure cost as well. So remember, I know there's a lot here, but like I said, we're here to help, so we can help guide through this process. Calculations and report requirements. For the custom pathway, there are spreadsheet calculations that are required. There's also a template that's required for filling out a project report. We will provide this after this, and that, like I said, gives guidance on certain requirements, things like that, that are needed in this for like influence, things like that. So we'll provide all that, and we'll help you through the review process. Once we get the project report, we champion a project through, we take that in-house and we'll move that project through the custom pathway and help through the review process the whole way through. The custom incentive process, the timeline here, the pre-review side of things, the first 3+ months here is really kind of depending on the level of project it is, like the level of rigor on that project. If it's a small or if it's a larger, more complex project, it might require more reviews. Then we verify it after the post, and then we'll issue like either the check or the loan comes after the project's completed and verified. The application process. If you have a project that you've been told maybe from CSER or OBF that it has to go the custom pathway, reach out to us on our website, email, or phone. We'll have our contact information here. Give us some information such as the project description, maybe history, any influence narrative discussions you have, emails. And then we'll help you through that process of putting together the project report and the calculations, and we'll help through that whole process. We'll have a follow-up call where we'll talk through the project and help you through there. Then there's also some paperwork. There's just an application that gets signed, and then we'll be able to put that project through the review process. The program forms, there's only two forms for a program. The application, which is at the beginning stage of the pre-review part of the presentation. The part of the project, and then there's at the end, after it's installed, there's a certification form. So those are the only two forms that get signed throughout the custom pathway side of things. So once again, we're getting towards the end of the presentation here. We're here to help. We'll help you through navigating the application process, the custom pathway. Once again, we're no cost technical and project support for things. We can provide additional rebates and incentives to your customers, so we might be able to offer some more services than you might not otherwise have been able to do for just an FA through an NMEC project in the past with OBF program. You can also sign up for a mailing list. We'll give up-to-date program information on new offerings, rebates availables, and more. So please sign up, and we encourage you to be involved with our program. So quick poll time. We want to hear from you. So what information would you most likely want to see from us in the future? We're going to put a poll up here. And if there's any update, like some of the polls, that the questions we're going to ask is if you want updates on new innovative technologies on equipment, maybe it's virtual trainings or how to best work with customers, case studies on successful completed projects, or maybe the application submittal process deadline, whatever that might be. We encourage you to take this poll and give us some feedback, so maybe we can have future webinars like this to help give some additional guidance or helpful information for you all. Some quick contact information at the end. So once again, my name is Andy Gustafson. Here's my direct cell phone number and my email address. We also have Antonio Alberti on the call. He's an engineering manager. We have Glenn LaPalme as well. He helps manage engineering side of things for some of our California programs. Once again, here's our contact information. We're here to help. We'd love to be able to work with you guys. Any questions, comments, reach out to us directly, and we'll be here to help. We're actually looking pretty good on time, so I was worried we'd go a little late. I am hanging out. We are all hanging out here on the TRC AESAP side of things to go ahead and transition to some Q&A type questions here. So if we got any questions in the chat, we'd love to take those on, or if you want to go off mute and ask questions, we can go back to prior topics we talked about, or if it's something unrelated, we encourage you guys to ask some questions. I will stick around for as long as, even for up to a half hour, if there's any questions or comments that anyone on the line might have. So let me take a quick look. Is there any questions on the line as I look through the chat to see if there's any questions on the custom pathway? Is it clear on when a project might have to go the custom pathway for an OBF type project? Did we help clarify that on what's needed, or were there any additional conversations or questions related to that we can help with? Once again, feel free to come off mute if you guys have any questions there. I see some people starting to chat. Influence questions, requirements, baselines. Once again, we're going to send out this recording and the content in here. While we wait for questions, I want to show this reference and resource slide as well. These are some links to some of the stuff we talked about. So we have a rebate catalog. So if you're working with the customer outside of a loan, we have rebates for things like dairy fan installation, VFDs, VFDs on ag well and booster pumps is a very common rebate that we have. So if you're working with customers and they're interested in maybe pump offerings or savings, we have rebates. We can help them put VFDs on ag well and booster pumps. We also put the link here to the PG&E resource savings rulebook. This is very helpful. It's like sometimes I call it like the Bible for a lot of requirements for the custom pathway. There's a lot of, if you're a little uncertainty, I mean, you don't have to dig through to find answers in the rulebook, but you can reach out to us directly because we know the rulebook very well. But that is a good resource that you can point to look back and see if that maybe answers questions on things related to influence, baseline, whatever it might be. I also put a link here on this YouTube link where CIT, the custom implementation team with PG&E, put together a really good, I thought was a really good training several years back on influence and what is successful influence. And there's a nice YouTube video there. I think it's only like 7 or 8 minutes long that helps give guidance on a successful influence. Because once again, influence, standard practice, baseline, those are the two biggest hurdles right now with custom pathway. And that's why we want to cover them on this webinar and try to answer any questions we might have on that. We also have a link here for the statewide project feasibility report template we talked about. So if you have a project that's go the custom pathway, you can download this pre-report template and it will give you those guiding questions for influence based on the influence level of tier, and also give some good guidance on baselines and other things and calculation approaches, things like that. I see a question in the chat. Clarity on seasonality when it comes to cold storage used in ag operations like post-harvest, et cetera. So from what we've heard, cold storage is in our mind still fair for NMEC eligibility. If it comes to that 10% uncertainty there. So if we can show that consistent load, it should still be able to go NMEC eligible. But if you get pushback on that, you know, maybe we can help try to clarify that with the OBF team or see what might be eligible. There is an NMEC rulebook. Maybe you can add the link here before we send out the follow-up here. But there is an NMEC specific rulebook that the CPUC has reviewed and approved that gives some good guidance on what is eligible and what is not. So if by reviewing or working with us and us together, or us TRC AESAP reviewing that NMEC rulebook, we believe this given measure type is applicable for NMEC, we will make that case and we can point that out and point back to that rulebook to hopefully be able to still offer that for like a given situation where maybe there's some uncertainty there. Question from NRG, is there any plans in motion to help speed up the timeline through the AESAP program? If we're referring to the custom program, there are so many working groups, and we're not the only program. It's not just the biggest timeline's kind of related to the pre-review and approval related to custom pathway. There's some really good working groups in progress in California to help streamline that process. There's CalTF through California we're very active with, and a lot of other implementers and utilities are as well that are trying to streamline that process. There's some great conversations going on now to help make that go faster. I will say, to help improve the timeline process, the more we have the documentation for influence and standard practice clearly identified and referenced in a given project, the timeline will go much faster. So if maybe it's a measure where we don't have that clear understanding of what that baseline is or what the standard practice baseline is, or we don't have those like multiple quotes or options, and the thing that really slows down the custom process and timeline is where we're trying to go back and piece together all that required documentation and information we need for the custom pathway, because we didn't get it from the get-go. So maybe we have a project or a customer come to us and say, we want to put in this piece of equipment or do this upgrade, but we don't have like any influence or like options, or we don't know their financial criteria to do this. Like, we have to build and establish all this documentation to build it into that project feasibility report template that we need to submit. So that's where there's the huge time sink. Same with like the calculation side of that. Calculations are actually fairly easy compared, as long as we know that baseline. So if we know what that baseline requirement is, we can build in those calculations quite quickly. But if we just have a quote with nothing else to back, we're going back and having to create all that stuff. So I will say, like, what can help speed up that process is having as much of this documentation we covered here in this presentation identified and highlighted at the very beginning of when you're working with a customer on a custom potential project, because then we have that already, and you just send us those emails on those interactions you had with the customer, and then we'll have that, we'll reference that, and we'll put it straight into the report. That helps a lot. So.
Hey, Andrew, this is Christine Gallegos-Hale from Trade Pro. How are you?
Good. Hey.
Good. Thank you for putting this on. Just a quick question. Our trade pros in the past have had big time burnout with custom. And having worked in custom myself for a number of years, I see where the angst is. In your experience, I haven't worked with it recently. What would you say would be your timeline or your turnaround time for a good custom project versus one that you were just describing of having lack of documentation? And do you find that the PUC is still requiring post-fielding monitoring on some of those, I want to say, equipment or measures that we don't have a lot of documentation on?
Yeah, great question. I will say, if we get a, like, say a trade pro has a project that's gonna have to have a custom pathway, they populate this project report template, which we provided here, with all the documentation we need. And we have, maybe, say if it's a lighting upgrade, and we have like the MLC or something like that tool populated with the project feasibility report template populated with everything we need with the influence documentation, a good project, right? What I call it, a good project. If you guys send that to us, there's timeline requirements for the review side of things that help speed it along. So say if we have that really good project report all sent to us, we would do a QC on it ourselves, and we'd submit that for review at PG&E. PG&E reviewers typically respond back with any questions they have on a custom project with, I think, within 2 weeks is what typically the turnaround time. And if we get those questions and we can't help answer them, we'd reach out to the trade pro. Maybe it's a question related to influence and you were interacting with the customer, not us. We'd have to work together to answer those questions. And we respond to those. And so I wish it was a clear-cut answer, but it really depends on the questions we get in the review. So if we had a good project that didn't really have any revisions needed in that pre-review side of things, maybe we could have a PG&E approval in a good project, a streamlined project, in maybe about a month, and then it goes on what's called the CMPA list, and then the CPUC may or may not pick it for review. If they pick it for review, that tacks on additional timeline that is outside of our control. I would say that could be a month or more. If they don't pick it, then it could go for like it could get approved quite quickly. I don't want to sugarcoat things though, depending on the complexity of the project. And say if it's not a streamlined like MLC lighting project or something like that, and it's a more complex like retrofit equipment, maybe like a chiller or light or whatever, something more complex. I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like the pre-review stage can take 3+ or more months. It just really depends on the level of rigor. So I will say if it helps, maybe reach out to us early on to see if this makes sense for the given customer or the opportunity, because we don't want to waste the customer or your guys' time on this. So if you have an idea of the measure, reach out to us early on and we can level set on what might be required for this given project. So related to M&V, measurement and verification on a project, for custom pathway, I mean, there's always M&V that's measurement and verification required for a custom project, but there's different types of M&V. That's called option A, B, whatever. Depending on the size of the project and the type of measure, it might just be verifying the equipment installed. So taking a picture of the equipment installed virtually and checkbox, we're done, right? If it's a more complex measure, we might have to put some data logging equipment on there and measure power for several weeks or a month to capture that. It really just depends on the measure and the complexity of it. So if there's uncertainty, maybe it's tied to production or something that and goes production based, we might need to capture more M&V, measurement and verification data, to show that we're accurately measuring estimating the savings on those. So to your question, yes, there is always verification in the post, but it could just be pictures, instantaneous requirements like taking snapshots, verifying the equipment's installed, or it might be data logging. It just kind of depends on the level of rigor. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much.
No problem. Yeah. Caesar, QCC team can evaluate project sites with cold storage to confirm eligibility. Yes. I just know we've had success with cold storage in the past with NMEC, so that's why I was going to say, if you believe it's an NMEC eligible, and I'll put the reference to the NMEC rulebook there, but that's what we're all following the same CPC rules and requirements that they put out, and the NMEC rulebook really helps highlight that. But I will say, if there's uncertainty, like we mentioned in the presentation, uncertainty in, there's production-based impacts, it's not a commercial like building or load, those are pretty clear indications that might have to go the custom pathway. But if you're unsure, or like, what about this scenario or this one, reach out to the OBF QCC team or us, an implementer. We're more than happy to help if it's an ag project and review it. I just want to make sure it's clear that it really comes down to the uncertainty in the meter-based data is what really drives what is able to go NMEC. And there is additional risk with those. So that's why we want to make sure there's those, the last thing we all would want is do a project for a customer through NMEC and there's too much uncertainty and then the project gets rejected, right? Too far down the line and the customer's like, I did this project and now it's not things like that. So there's a reason why we want to do this up front is we want to make sure it's successful with the customer. We can also help facilitate credit screenings as well and do the FA records. I will say for trade pros in the past that we've worked with, typically if you guys initiate an FA, if you want to tie that FA to our program so we can access it, if it's a custom type project or might have to go that pathway, then we can see it and we can review and start discussing the type of measure so we can do that cost effectiveness analysis on our end. I know OBF, I think some PG&E teams will also do CET runs and things like that. We do that ourselves as well at no cost. So if you guys want to reach out to us for a specific project, We can do that CET run analysis to see if it's cost effective. And we'll also do other analysis to make sure it has a sufficient total system benefits to make sure it's eligible through third-party programs or our program. And Andrew pointed out a lot of the projects the trade pros do, and I agree, are lighting in nature. So yes, I agree, but I have seen other ones, right? So we want to highlight that, and maybe you're focused on just lighting with customers, but if you're going to have to go the custom pathway, it's good to know that there's other third-party resources like ourselves that are supporting the ag sector. There's other third parties that support other sectors with PG&E that are just like us, that support other, like industrial, maybe high tech, whatever. There's more than just lighting we can do. Like most of our larger incentive and rebate paying and savings based projects are not lighting type projects. So just know that there's other additional resources there that we can help with, and know that we're here to help. We have gotten rebates, incentive dollars that we're looking to give out to customers, and we can work with you guys, the trade pros, to offer additional services to customers. So we can really help there. And even if you're doing an NMEC eligible project and maybe it doesn't have to go the custom pathway, if you want to tie those to our program and work with us, we can work together, help. We have really good contacts and relationships with customer account representatives where we can help get in front of the customer and maybe get some information from the customer that maybe you're having trouble getting, or maybe help bring that project across the finish line, things like that. There's other support that we can offer. So we want to definitely, I'll put our contact information back up. We want to definitely have you guys reach out to us so that we can help in all aspects here. Yeah, talking about VFDs. So yes, they got VFDs that maybe you want to pursue. So we've got deemed rebates there. Yeah, we can help with a lot of the VFDs on well booster pumps. There's really good savings for VFDs on like dairy fans that we see had a lot of success with customers, things like that. And also I want to highlight, like, while you're talking about lighting, like we work with a lot of the brewery, winery, distilleries. There's a lot of really good refrigeration opportunities, things like that, process compressors, all that stuff can have a really good energy savings, but most of those would have to go the custom pathway for those more process type things. But there's some really good savings opportunities there that could be wrapped into FA and loans for the OBF process that we can help, get those projects through the custom pathway. So reach out for us on those type of opportunities for like the brewery, winery, distilleries, things like that. Any other? Oh, yeah.
We do have someone with their hand up that's been waiting patiently. If you'd like to speak up.
Thanks, Carmen.
Thanks, Carmen. That was just me. Hey, Andy. Yeah, I had a question. I know a lot of us have customers who maybe aren't that into email, aren't that great at recapping the things they're telling us on the phone. Are there other options for providing that documentation influence? Like, could we do maybe with the customer's permission, like an audio recording of one of our meetings, or like the meeting transcript if we're having a team meetings, provide screenshots of text messages, things like that for those who aren't the greatest at email.
We get that all the time. We get ag customers that aren't usually on their computers all the time, right? They're out in the field, they're doing work, right? They're very busy, right? For those, yes, there is other documentation process you can use. So like, I always very, very much recommend to do like meeting minutes after you talk with the customer. One of the best things that you could do, which really helps, is like, say you have a phone call with a conversation, recap that phone call, kind of write up almost like a little summary. Like, it was great talking to you on the phone, and email Mr. Customer. Like, even if they don't respond, you get that documented in an email, even if it's one-sided, but it shows documentation with that timestamp from back prior. So you could say like, it was great talking to you. You highlighted how you needed a loan to be able to cover the cost. Otherwise you can't do the upgrade. We'll follow back with some options for you, and like, documenting that in either meeting minutes or maybe a recap email back to the customer is very helpful. Audio things, which is not as common, but you could do things, meeting minutes, anything like that could help document that, to build and show things with some sort of timestamp of like, I had a conversation with this customer on this date during the development stage prior to them wanting to do the project, right? It shows to help build that influence narrative. different types of documentation have different sort of what I would say like weighting on what would help for an influence narrative. So things like technical influence, we give them like the calculations, the payback summary, that goes a long way too. But if you only have like a one-sided conversation, even if you document that to them, that might not hold as much weight as in the customer replying to you saying we need this, right? So just keep that in mind. There's different levels of like influence, but there are definitely ways to do influence that make it easier. And one of those I'm describing right now is like you talk with the customer on the phone, or you knocked on their door and you're talking with them. Send like write down either like a meeting minute or like like you could keep to yourself or send back to them to recap that meeting, which is always great when you're building a relationship with a customer. So like, it was great talking to you the other day. This is what we discussed, and highlight those type of influence related things like financial criteria things, or they need certain help with understanding the savings, like all that stuff, highlight that in an email with that, and that'll really help there. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded of a response, but yeah, hopefully that helps.
That's great. Thanks, Andy.
I see chat. Let me go back to the chat, see if there's something else here. Any other questions, comments that we can help with? Well, I'm not hearing anymore. So what we'll do is just a reminder, we're gonna send out the recording of this presentation by the end of the week. We'll send out some of those resources we mentioned in the past as well, like the template, all our contact information, some rule books, guidance, things like that. But more than anything, just reach out to us if any questions, comments after this that we can help with. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, we look forward to partnering and working with you guys. So yeah, please get in touch. Yeah, thank you. Sarah, anyone else from the TRC side have any other things before we wrap it up, or? Okay, I think we're good. All right, bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.